Right, good afternoon or good evening, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me now. I've switched from a Wi-Fi to a cable, so my connection should be more stable. I think I just moved in an apartment and I've just managed to get the internet working today. Can you confirm that you can hear me, that everything's working as soon as you can on the group chat? And when that's happened, I'll move on. Okay, good. Cool. So what I'll do is, when we didn't get very far there, only 5 minutes in, so I'm going to sort of restart so that this video is twiddly-dee, Mary, so that this video is complete for people who are not watching it now. So I'm just going to restart that whole thing, and it might be better just to slow down a bit anyway, and cover again what was just said. To find an easy way of finding out what the questions and things are. Okay, everyone's saying I can see. Yeah. So every time someone says something in the chat, I get a message. So don't just say hi and hello everyone, because that sort of beeps in my ear and interrupts the flow of conversation because they assume there's some pressing question. So if you can restrict yourself to pressing questions, but please do ask questions. That's no problem. Just I just don't want to interrupt the flow of conversation. So where are we then? Right, yeah, let's just begin from the top. What I would like to do with these two sessions, Monday and Tuesday, is, since that we can't arrange on-site teaching and project work for the Monday and Tuesday for Leeds and London, I thought I'd try and accelerate the process as fast as possible by recording myself building up a website from scratch all the way, or at least quite far to the way towards the end. And I would like everyone in both groups to have watched both videos and to have tried individually to follow along exactly in their own time the things that I am doing. So to have actually produced the same set of files, more or less, as the files that I'm going to be writing today and tomorrow, so that every individual person can follow along, has an understanding of how to build a website and so on. And then in your groups, you can each try and expand on that process, recreate that process as it applies to your blogs. Right. So let's begin with a brief or specification of the kind of website I'm going to create. Well, I'm going to create a guest book. And the basic description of a guest book, sorry to repeat this for those who have just listened, is a kind of open book that members of the public can sign and leave public or anonymous or signed messages, which could inform, say, an event hall or a hotel or a conference space or some other kind of institution, what things are doing well and what things are doing poorly. Now, websites, back in the 90s now, really, sometimes had guest book sections of their site so that people who were browsing their site and visiting their site could leave them public, anonymous or signed messages saying, well, I appreciated this or I didn't appreciate that. Now, guest books have gone out of favor for a long time, but they're another kind of classic basic site you can build along with the blog. And they function in a very similar way. So let's build up a guest book. So where are we going to go from? We're going to start with a database. Now, one of the pieces of software that you can use as an alternative to PHPMyAdmin is something called MySQL Workbench. You can Google for MySQL Workbench and find a download. If you open the application, it looks something like this. You then click on this plus to create a new connection. Just give the connection a name, say local, doesn't really matter what you name it. And all the defaults are set up to be basically what XAMPP defaults will be for your MySQL database that's local to your machine. Press test connection and it should work. And then just press OK and it will connect to your local database. And it gives you this little button that you can press here. Once you click on that, it will open up your database installation. Just press continue. These continue notifications will happen with the XAMPP installation of MySQL. It's just something you have to deal with. And on the left-hand side here, you see the databases that have been created already. And I'm going to delete this one. So this is right-click, drop schema. So schema is another name for a database. So drop schema, drop now, that deletes it. Create schema, meaning create database. I can give this a name, guest book. I can press apply down here. And what MySQL Workbench will do is before it runs any commands in the database, it will tell you exactly what SQL is going to run on your behalf. So create schema is another way of saying create database. So create database guest book. I press apply. That then just runs this SQL for me locally. So all this application is doing is just generating SQL to run very easily. So if I click on this little button here, I can now see the tables I have, and there are no tables. So there's nothing listed in the tables. But I can create a table. So right-click, create table. Give the table a name. Let's give the name comments. Let's give a column ID. So each column has a unique ID associated with it. Right. And a column message by the name of text. Right, well, I'll let the group deal with that one. Right, now text should be, that's fine. So the ID column will be a primary key, meaning there'll be a unique ID for every entry, and it won't be null, so not null. Message will be of type text, and that will contain the message for the guest book. So each row, each entry in our guest book will have unique ID, and it will just be at this moment a message. So we can click apply here. That will generate some SQL. The SQL it generates is create table guest book comments with the columns ID and message. Where ID is an integer and it's not null, it actually should have some other things. So if I press cancel, it should be auto incrementing. That means it adds 1 to each time. And that's about it actually. So apply. So there you go. ID is an integer. It's not null, so it's not empty. And it automatically increases by 1 each time. It has a message column, which is text and can be null. And the primary key for this table, the uniquely identifying piece of information for each entry for this table, is the ID. So let's press apply and it will run that SQL. Right, now I've got some tables and I can see those here. So if I right click here, I can click select rows and that will show me, it'll run this query here, which is select all from guestbook comments, and it will tell me that the table is empty right now. So if I click on form editor on the right hand side here, I can just put some values in. So message, this guest book is okay, I suppose. Then click apply, apply, finish. Now if I select rows again, I see an entry 1. This guest book is okay, I suppose. That's the message. Now, this program, as I said, is all it's doing is generating very basic SQL commands: insert, select, create table, create database, and running those commands for you. You can run them from the command line using MySQL, and if you want to know how to do that, then there's the notes I prepared. So you could look at the notes, and you should see some on SQL and defining data and using data. Those are the SQL commands, and you can it was shown using MySQL command line. There is also this application here. The end result is the same, which is to say to configure, modify, update a database. Now, if you want to get all the SQL basically that you've run on a database, you can use a tool called MySQL dump. Now, the MySQL dump lives in C, XAMPP, MySQL, bin, and if you create a command line here, command prompt file, new command prompt, or you could open a new command prompt, run cmd, and then cd to czamp MySQL bin. Right. Now you can run here MySQL dump tool. MySQL dump takes a username, root, and a password, which in this case is empty, and it takes the name of the database finally, so guestbook. And if you press enter, it will write out all the SQL that you need to run to recreate in full the guestbook database. So if I press enter now, there's no password. That's all the SQL you need to run in full. Now, one way of saving this output is to write a little greater than sign here, and then just write something like saved guestbook.sql. And this little greater than sign means take all the output of this command and save it to this file, or write it to that file. So if I press enter, it will create that file, fill it with this output, and then we can see here somewhere there'll be a file now called saved guestbook. If I open that in a text editor, you can see that's the output of the command. Now, everything between these two symbols is a comment, so a lot of this stuff is just kind of somewhat helpful comments. The actually, running SQL, the actual stuff that's doing things, is really here. So you can see what MySQL Workbench has done now. All it's really done is run this command, the create table comments with an ID and a message, and it's inserted into comments the values, one for the ID and the message, this guestbook is okay, I suppose. Now the MySQL dump tool inserts helpful little commands like drop table if exists, and those commands basically delete existing tables by the name of comments and replace them with this information here. So if you were to run all of this SQL on an existing guestbook database, it would delete the existing comments table and replace it with all of this SQL here. So what I would advise you to do is Google the MySQL dump tool, so this tool here, and how that works a little bit. And that's one of the ways that you can save the current state of your database and share it with other people in your team. In fact, mentioning and having an understanding of this tool will probably be a good thing to keep in mind for your presentation. You can, one of my pieces of advice would be just to use a Dropbox, a shared Dropbox for this project. You can, if you're feeling adventurous, use something like a source version control system like Git or SVN or something like that. SVN isn't a particularly collaborative one, but Git is. Now Git is just a it's just an extremely more complicated way of achieving the same thing as Dropbox achieves for documents. Git has a few more features for dealing with code, but it is far more complex than Dropbox and actually provides basically the same thing you're looking for this project, which is just a simple way of sharing code. So my advice would be to use Dropbox, because you probably don't have a great deal of time to try and learn Git all over again. Maybe learning Git might be something you do, and you can talk about how you might use that on a future project as a kind of improvements to your practice. I wouldn't really waste that much time trying to learn it now. But if you do use a Dropbox as a way of sharing code, then maybe one of the things you could do, or should do at least, is keep a running MySQL dump of your entire database. So, give that a date today, 10 p.m. That's the output. And whenever you make a change to the database, if you change a column, you change a row, you do something different, then recreate, do a new dump of everything, give it a different timestamp as a name, and that gives you a running history of all the states your database has been in. So if you need to go back to one, you can just go to yesterday's one, run all the SQL in that file, and it will delete everything in your database and recreate it again as it was at that particular point in time. And if you're all using the same SQL files, dump files from MySQL dump, then all your databases will look the same. So that's one way of sharing SQL code. So let's have a look. Hang on. Right. Good. Now where was I? So what have we got then? So what have we got? We've got a database called Guestbook, and that has a table called Comments, and Comments has an ID field and a message field. Now, one of the things I want to do is create a Guestbook website. That means to have an index page that lists the messages I've got in my database, and a submission page, a page to show or allow members of the public to submit comments, either with an author's signature perhaps, or anonymously. Oh, hang on. Well, who's bloody hell calling me? Please don't call me. Can you watch that link? Right. Hang on. Let me just deal with this. Is that the right link, everyone? That's the right link. Right. Well, I'm just going to leave this beeping for now then, because I need to get on with this. So, right. Where was I? So, yeah. So, as an index page that lists all the messages from the Guestbook, and a submission page that allows someone to submit. That's kind of what I'm hoping to have accomplished by today. And tomorrow I'll look at adding in extra features, username, perhaps password, login, and some other stuff to round it out. So what I would like you to do is, if you can complete this Guestbook in your own time, you will find that actually it will modify to become a blog very simply, and I think you'll find that hopefully somewhat obvious as we go through. At least this is one of the things you might do. I would strongly suggest that you do it though. Right, so if we've got a database, so this is one of the first things you should do, I guess, if you're following along, is get your database like this. You've got yourself a Guestbook database, you've got yourself a comments table. The table has an ID and a message field. It has an entry with an ID of 1 and a message of something, and then with that. Right, so let's go to our editor, Atom. Right, good. So I've created a folder called Group Project here. This Group Project folder is, well, it should be in my htdocs folder. Let me just make sure it's inside htdocs. XAMPP htdocs group project select folder. There we go. Seems to be 2. So here we go. So it's in CXAMPP htdocs group project. Now my group project folder has an index.php file. Now the index.php file is the file that is automatically run when you go to your local host or localhost / something. So if I just write here echo hello world, now I'll find that my index.php file is run if I go to localhost group project hello world, right? So that index.php is sort of assumed or implied. So I could have written index.php there. Now index is just the default word, the default file. Right. Good. Now what? Right, well, so I've got an index.php file. Now what's my index going to do for my Guestbook? Well, the index is going to just list out all the messages. Now, well, how do we list out all the messages? Well, I'm going to open up the PDO PowerPoint from the materials. I'm going to go to connecting to a database slide, and I'm going to copy this code here. So that's the first part of the puzzle, is to copy this. That then gives me, so that says, try this piece of code. If that piece of code creates any errors, handle the errors with this piece of code, where the error could be a PDO exception. So that's the type of the error it could be, and that's the particular error that we would get out of it. So, and line 6 there says, dies, that's end the script, with the message, the errors message. Right. So here, we'll get rid of the options. We don't need options here so much. The password is empty. The user is root. And the DSN is the like URL for the database. What I would have hoped is there'll be a nice little DSN that I can copy and paste. But since there doesn't seem to be, another thing you can follow along with is if you Google PDO connect PHP, the PDO construct PHP would be a good one as well. This part of the PHP documentation also goes through the same piece of code, so this try catch thing. So, but it gives you the DSN, so it's like the address of the database. So the address of the database here is MySQL DB name testdb and host localhost. So let's just put that in there for reference. So we want to put in here MySQL DB name equals guest book in our case, host equals, and then you can just write localhost. Now 127.0.0.1 means the same thing as localhost. That's the IP address of the local machine. Localhost is like the domain name of the local machine. So just between google.com and Google's IP, the address of its machine. So they both point to the same machine, which is to say the one I'm currently working on. Right, so that gives us a new object called PDO. So PDO is an object. That means you can use arrows with it. Basically, it means you can ask it questions, execute something. So PDO execute this. I can get little pieces of information from it. So the last ID that it had. Right. So PDO is now my object. So PDO means PHP data objects, and the variable PDO is the object that represents my connection to my local database. Yes. Right. So one of the things I want to do with my index page is list out or print out all of the messages in the database. Let's go to my slides and look through the pieces of code that I've got available to me. Now, these are not necessarily the most descriptive slides, but here we are in a video anyway. So I can select, so we've already got our PD object, so we don't need to create a new one. So this line here doesn't really matter too much. And the rest of these lines are somewhat helpful. So this tells us there's the command called query. It says query, I can put in a select query that gives me a statement object that I can put in a loop and get out a row each time. Right, so let's follow through that here. So PDO is my object. Query is the piece of behavior or the function I'm going to ask my object to perform, if you like. So I'm going to say PDO query select all from comments, which is a table in my guestbook application. That gives me a statement object. So it gives me a new object back. So my new object is statement object. Now, Let's see what happens if I just loop over statement. We'll see what happens. I'm not sure it'll quite work. But statement as let's go for row, print r row. Now let me run this file. Ah, look at that! It seemed to work. It worked. Right. Good. So when you so in this case, the statement can this little statement object has a property called it's iterable. So the property is iterable, and this statement is iterable, meaning it can be iterated over, meaning it can be looped over, meaning ultimately I can put it in this position in a for each loop. So arrays are not the only kinds of things that you can loop over with for each statements. You can loop over any kind of thing that's iterable. Arrays are iterable, but these statements also happen to be. So let's have a look. I had a question. Right. Right. Enlarge my screen. So, sorry, Mary. I'll try enlarging the text so that you can read it a little easier. Please tell me if that isn't good enough. Now, I appreciate perhaps some aspects of this will be still a little bit too small, but the important thing is the code to follow along. Now, all of this code I will provide you with on Wednesday and Thursday, but I would like you to go through it yourself in your own time before then. So good. So now we've put our statement in this part of the for each loop, which means that we're looping over it, we're extracting data from it as we go around the loop. So here we're saying for each statement, that means for everything inside statement, give me a particular thing I'm going to call a row, and then with the particular thing, print R it and go around and around and around until you've gotten all the things out of statement. So here I'm going to write echo row message. So it turns out that when you loop over a statement, the thing you get out each time you loop over it is an associative array that has the keys of your database table. So in our case, we've got comments. So the keys are ID and message, which are our two columns. So when I loop over my statement, I get a row out at a time, and each row is an associative array with the keys, message, and ID. So if I just run this, I just get the single message that is in the database. If I would put two messages in there, one would expect I get two messages out. Let's try that just so we can see what happens. So I can go select rows, get a list of all the data in here. One thing I can do is just double click on these empty slots and fill them in with some new information. So I could write the guest book is getting better. Apply here, and that just tells me the SQL that's going to run on my behalf, which is in this case insert into comments the ID2 and the message the guest book is getting better. So I'll click apply here, that runs the SQL, that then shows me I now have two entries according to the workbench. Again, I can go to the dump tool, get an export of all the SQL coming out, and that would show me that I would have two entries. Let me just have a look. Enlarge the screen for the SQL. Yeah, we just have a look. The SQL isn't that important for now. I'll try and adjust the resolution for tomorrow, but I'll continue with this as we're going along. So here we go. Right, so now if I run this again, what I should get is two messages output. There you go. The first message, this guest book is like okay, I suppose. And the second message, this guest book is getting better. So that's the message I just inserted. So if I, in addition, echo a new line, then I'll get those written across lines. So remember, this loop means that for everything inside this, name a particular thing this. So for every row, for every this thing here is a statement. It means it's a group of rows. So take out a row, call it $ROW, and for every row, run this piece of code. So for every row, echo its message and echo a new line. So that's what we're getting here. So for the first row, do an echo the message, echo a little new line, and then for the second row, echo the message and echo a new line. Good. So in terms of functionality, that's kind of what our index page is going to do for a guestbook. The rest is a bit of pomp and circumstance. So let's just run localhost guestbook. Right, no, it's group project, I called it. There we go. So this guestbook is okay, I suppose. This guestbook is getting better now. Remember, that's running all on the same line, and that's somewhat unformatted because there's no HTML in the output. So you can see the new line when you go to view source, but the browser is looking for HTML to tell it how to, or to give it hints about how to lay out things. So the HTML is for describing the information, and CSS is for telling it how to lay it out. So let's wrap some HTML around this then. Let's take out all of this. This is the actual sort of controller-y sort of model-y controller-y sort of code that's getting hold of data and doing things with data. So if you look at this and you think, well, how does this fit into MVC? This bit here is the view. This is saying echo something out. So this is the view logic. This is kind of the decision logic a bit. Connect the database and get me the comments. And then the second part is sort of view the comments. So in this situation, the statement is in fact the model. The statement is the thing holding the information, is the object holding the information. So maybe what we'll do right now is take all this, cut that, create a new file. We'll call that file, let's call that file, I don't know. Let's keep it simple now. We'll call it get comments. Get comments.php. Save that. And rather than calling it statement, I'll call it comments. Right? Comments. To indicate that it's the actual collection of comment rows. So what we can get back to exactly the same piece of code, the same functionality, by writing include get comments.php. So that hasn't really done much in terms of functionality. We're exactly where we were, but it has moved out all of the sort of unrelated code about getting stuff from the database, and it's put it in a separate file. We could go one further and put it into a separate function, but I want to just get on with the functionality. But by putting it into a separate file, we have moved it out into a different area, which keeps our thoughts clearer about the application. It isn't all in one thing, and it isn't all going to sort of bleed into one another and get us confused and get the code confused. We're going to separate that out, so there's one area for one thing, another area for another thing. So in terms of functionality, we haven't achieved much, but in terms of design, we actually have achieved quite a lot by simplifying it in that way. Right, next step. Let's leave this in, and let's put some HTML around this, because an echo statement is actually pretty much exactly what HTML is doing as well. So the HTML is about viewing things, and echo is about viewing things. So HTML and echo statements, they're okay to go together. HTML and SQL statements are not okay to go together because they're completely different goals. The SQL is about making decisions, about getting data and stuff. The HTML is not about any of that sort of thing. So we can mix just basic echo statements in HTML. So let's go for, let's put some HTML down. HTML, head, title. Let's go for guestbook, title, head, body, Close PHP, body. Oh, hang on, that's not the right language, is it? Close the HTML. So that's our page now. So that looks pretty straightforward. Let's go back and refresh this. Ooh, we haven't changed that to comments. Okay, so the same output, because all we've done is wrap it in some basic HTML. Now we don't want to evolve the HTML to make it a little prettier. So let's go for heading 1, guest book. Right, heading 1. Let's rather than just have a new line here, let's put in a paragraph here. So echo echo paragraph, echo, hang on, close paragraph. That's going to wrap our message in a paragraph for each one. So if I refresh that, you get the heading, and then you get one paragraph and another paragraph. So each paragraph is separated by white space. So one paragraph here, another paragraph there. Okay, well that's looking okay. We could go further than that, but I think that's a good first point. Let's move on to the submission page. So we want a file, new file. We want to submit.php, and this is going to be the page where the member of the public comes along and writes a comment in for us. So let's create an HTML form. So HTML head, title, submit, title, close the head section, body, heading 1, guest book, submit, a comment, heading 1. Right, good, so we're somewhere now. Now let's create a form. So form action. Now the action here, I'm going to make different than the page where the form is on. So previously what we had done is written the code that looks at the post variable and deals with the post variable somehow in the same page as we'd written the form. And we just left the action empty, and what that would do is submit the form to the very same page the form is on, so that if any PHP code was on that form, on that page, and that PHP code dealt with the post, then that sort of page would deal with its own form. But now I'm going to change the location of where the form data is being submitted to, and I'll just call this sort of, if I've got a get comments page, I'm going to have a create comments page. So we've got create comment.php. Method is going to be post, and that's all we need there. We're going to give it, and the only table really in our database, or the only sort of field in our table at the moment that is of any interest is the message field, and that's going to be a text area. So that's a little square box. The name of that text area is going to be message, and that's about it. We can give it a row and column. We can give it a rows of 10 and a cols of 10, and that is really just to do with how it's laid out on the page. Actually, it just gives it a 10 by 10 square look. So that's the text area. Now, text areas do actually need closed off like that. Now, you may not have seen a text area before, or we may have skirted over it a bit. I'm not sure how much we labored on that. But certainly what we have focused on primarily are inputs of type text. And text areas are a bit different. An input is just a single row. A text area is a kind of box. And it's sort of an accident of history that they are named different things. There really is no reason it could not have been input for both. But in any case, here we go. Now we've got a form, we've got a text area. Now we need a button. Button type submit. That means it's gonna, if you press it, it'll actually submit the form. And name, we don't need to give it a name actually. We say send. That'll be the button's little name, basically the one you see on the page, and close off the button, and then close off the form. Right, so these name fields in these text areas and these inputs, those name fields are basically giving the data the key it's going to have in the post array. So the post array is PHP's array that holds all the form information, and the key of that array for this box here is going to be message. So if I go post message, I will find the message the user has entered. So that's what that name field is doing. If I change the name to something else like X, then it'd be post X is where I would find this information. That'll become a little bit more obvious when we see the form submission code. So close off body and close off HTML. And that completes the submit page. So let's just have a look at the submit page. So here's the index page. And if I type index there, I get the same thing. And if I look at submit, I get the submit page. It doesn't look particularly pretty, but it certainly should work. So if I just type something and I press send, it'll go to createcomment.php. But of course, createcomment.php doesn't exist yet. So we need to create that. So new file, create comment.php. So create comment. What's that going to do? Well, let's have a look. Now we could just echo post message, just to make sure we can actually get hold of the message that's been sent. So if I press refresh now and I press continue to resend the information to the create comment page, then that will resend the information I put in, which was just some nonsense in a box. So if I change that nonsense in a box, send, then we get that echo message back. So let's have a look. So one of the things I want to make sure is if the post is empty, so if empty post, then I'm just going to die and say nope, or could say error or something else. But basically, if the post is empty, I don't want to submit anything. So if someone sort of accidentally goes into the create comment page without having submitted a form to get to it, then the page is just going to say nope, because the post will be empty in that case if they just happen to accidentally browse to it without having gone through the form. So maybe I'll write something more descriptive there, because that's it. Error, you need to have submitted the form. There we go. So if it's empty, the whole thing will die. That means if we get to this point in our application, line 6 onwards, we haven't died. So I can continue to proceed as if message had something in it, because it certainly will do. Now, what do we want to do now? Well, we want to connect to the database, and we want to submit or insert into the database the message. So how do we connect to a database? Well, we've got the code here, right? Now this is another point of abstraction. We could take out this code and put it somewhere in common, because it's doing this. We don't really just copy and paste this into the create common bit, because we could do that. There's nothing that seriously wrong with it, but that's part of the point of functions, is to kind of abstract out the common pieces of functionality. So let's add a file here, a new file, functions.php, and functions.php will let us we'll just include that wherever, and we can create some functions there. So one of the functions we'll create is a function to give us that connection. So PHP function get, get connection. Get connection, return PDO. Good. So in this file here, I'll write PDO equals get connection, and I'll make sure I include once functions.php. And if I just wrote include there and I happen to accidentally include functions more than once, I get an error. So if I include once functions.php, then it will make sure it only includes it once. So let's write that there, and let's write this here. So now I have available to me in my create comments script, I have available the get connection function. So I can call that function. I will get a PDO object being returned to me. Let's just have a quick look over that function. I knew that went a bit too quickly. All I did was copy and paste this PDO creation code here. So I create an object PDO, creates a new PDO object, and then just returns that PDO object. So if I call this function, I get returned to me this PDO object. So PDO equals get connection. Right. So is there a right. Get connection. Right, now where am I? What am I doing now? Well, I'm writing to the database. I'm trying to write this message to the database. So I've got its connection now. I've got the PDO object, which represents the connection to the database. Now I want to PDO execute a query, I think. If I go to my PowerPoint, I can find that there's a one called execute a query. But this is the preferred way of running pretty much every kind of query with PDO. You use two function calls on the PDO object. The first one is prepare, and the second one is execute. Let's look. So with the prepare one, let's look. I know what they do. I need to copy and paste it really. But with the prepare one, you write the SQL you would like to run. So the SQL we want to run here is insert into the comments table with the field message, the value. It's values, yeah. And then put a question mark where you would put the actual value you want to insert. So you put a question mark there. Now this prepare command basically builds up this SQL for you. It sort of saves it in a more efficient way. And wherever there's question marks, it will later on allow you to put in the data into those positions. Now, you can run queries with the query command, as we did with the get comments there, query command. And the query command will just run a piece of SQL literally as written. It won't do any of this kind of making it a little bit more efficient and creating these little placeholders. Now, the danger of just running an SQL command with something like a post variable inside it. So I could write something like PDO query insert post message. The danger of writing something like that is that this variable here, this post variable, could contain SQL itself. Someone might have maliciously gone to the form and tried to type in SQL in that form, and if you just jam that SQL, jam that form field into your own SQL, then you could be jamming malicious SQL into safe or predictable or understood SQL that you've written, and that's a dangerous thing to do, and that's called SQL injection. So you want to be using the prepare command. The prepare command defends against SQL injection by not allowing you to jam any post variables or anything in there. You put question marks where you would put the information, and then that gives you back this statement object. So when you run the prepare function on the PDO with some SQL, that gives you a statement object. This object now will take in the information later on, which PDO will sort of put into a safe context. So even if they were to put SQL there, it wouldn't actually run the SQL. It wouldn't do anything malicious. So it can separate out more clearly what is data coming in from the user, which it should treat in a different way than SQL that you've written. And the way we give it the information later on is with the execute command. So that actually runs the query. So now we've prepared it and we've got our query. So we might even just call this a query because that might be a little bit clearer. So we get a query from the prepare, and then we execute the query with the information message. Now, if I pass in one argument into this execute function, that basically puts this argument in the first place it finds a question mark. And if I put in multiple arguments, then it will fill in multiple question marks in my SQL. So if I had comma, question mark, and so on, then I could put 3 arguments in my execute. So for example, a username, password, email, I could put a username, password, email here. Right, so that should just work. Now I can write if the query runs successfully, echo success, else echo failure. Right, let's try run this create common script with our form. Back to the index.php. So this is a submit file. It has a little form. The guest book. No, let's go for something different. I do not mind this guest book. If I press send, we're going to go off to the create comment.php file. Now that file will get a PDO object from the get connection function. With that PDO object, it will call prepare, the function on the PDO object. That prepare function will take in an SQL, and it will prepare the SQL to be run later on, and it will prepare it by creating these little slots that we can put information into. This particular SQL command says insert into our comments table a particular message. When we've got the query, we can execute that query and we can say exactly what message we want to insert. So in this case, the message that was sent with the form, so the post message. Let's have a look then. So if I press send, does it really want it to be an array? If it wants it to be an array, that's simple enough. Just put it in square brackets. And that should just work straight away. If the syntax is right, so let's be careful. Is that enough parentheses? Is now right. Run. Good, success. So let's have a look. If I go to my index.php, I will now find 3 messages. So the 2 that I initially created in the database, this is guestbook. This guestbook is okay. And now the one that I've just submitted with my form. So what I might like to do, in fact, is rather than say success here, because that doesn't really tell the user how that they were that successful. It doesn't show them that they've submitted the comment. I'm going to write in header location and group project, and that will redirect them to the index page. So this header command is a command that PHP runs. So this is on the web server, and that it tells the web server, it tells Apache to send to the browser a header called location. And when the browser receives a header, that is to say a piece of metadata, piece of extra information about the request, when it receives that location header, the browser will redirect that location. So that's what's happening here. The script is running by PHP. The PHP says to Apache on the web server, send this location header with your response. The browser receives that on the other end. The browser then redirects. So let's follow this through. I go to my form. I go to the submit page on the form. So submit, that's the form. I type in a new message. I press send. That takes, if I press send now, I go to the create comment page. And the create comment page, if it manages to successfully create a comment, will redirect me back to the index page. So I press send and I expect to go to the index page. It didn't quite, it didn't quite do that. That's because I've missed off a forward slash. So there we go. I ended up submitting the new message twice, but the whole thing follows through now. I go to the submit page, press send. That is successful. That redirects me here. Now what I might want to do is add to my index page a link that takes me to my submit page. So let's go to my index page and add a nav section here. Maybe nav. I create an unordered list. I give my unordered list one element, a link to the submit page. Send a comment. li good. I end my unordered list and I close my navigation section. So if I refresh my index page, I now can see a send a comment link that takes me to the just the submit page. I meant group project submit. Group project submit. So that first forward slash there on the link means beginning from the very beginning of the domain, so localhost, / the folder, / the file. So let's refresh that now. And let's go back and refresh that. Now I go to click on here. I get to the submit a comment. Another interesting comment. Exclamation mark. Send. Another interesting comment. Right. Let's tidy this up slightly and then leave it there because we've been on now for an hour, and though I was going to make this 2 hours, I think we might do another hour and a half tomorrow, and then that, you know, as a sort of better way of organizing the time. Let's then have a look. We're tidying this up. So we're going to create comment page here. Now this is mixing all kinds of code. We've got it's got some business decision logic here. So it's sort of get to the database and then get some data from the database and then run the query. And if the query is run, then redirect. All these are decisions. And we've got some output here as well. Echo failure. That's a bit weird. So one of the things we could do is take these kinds of this kind of code here and bundle it up into functions. But for now, I'm just going to move this. I might just leave it here. I mean, the only problem really is this echo failure because it's mixing viewing stuff with decisions. But everything else is actually just decisions, really. So it's the only error here is this mixing an echo in. So what we could do instead is echo is rather than echo is redirect. So location group project error.php, and that then says, oh, there was an error. So if I create a new file, error.php, and I could put there was an error. So if we redirect this page, then the user doesn't see some kind of horrible PHP error information. They just see this. Good. Right, so let's just follow through on all the steps I took there to build this little site. The first thing I did was go to the database, and I created a database, and I created a table comments. Now with that table, there are two things I want to do with it. Given that I've got a message column and an ID column, I want a page that lists all the contents of that table. That's what this index.php page is doing. It's just listing the contents of that table. And I want another page that lets me insert things into that table. So I need a form and I need a send button. And when I press the send button, I need it to insert the thing into the table and then show me the list again, show me what's in the table again. So I did that. So I created the database first, and I created two separate visible pages, an index.php page and a submit.php page with a form. I then connected those pages up to the database somehow. So with the form page, I got that to submit to a create comment page. And with the index page, I just sort of wrote my little HTML, and then I included my comments file that sort of did the querying. And inside my comments, my get comments file, I run my little SQL query, select all the comments within my index.php page. I just write them out. In my get comments page, I then just hang on. In my submit page, I write get create comment, which is where the form submitted. In my create comment page, I just again prepare a SQL query, execute the SQL query, and if it executes successfully, send the user back to my index page. So if you can follow all that, if you can write all that up and follow through what's going on, you'll find that it's basically the same procedure for your users of a blog. It's basically the same procedure for your articles page. You want a page that lists all the articles out. You want a page that allows you to submit an article. You want to separate things out into different files and so on. So you can either recreate this exactly as I've done with the guest book, or you could, rather than call the database guest book, you could call it blog, and rather than call the table comments, you could call it articles. And you could fill out that table with more information, like a date, like a category or something else, and then you could display that information on the listing page as well. And you could experiment with expanding from this starting point. So I'm going to continue this tomorrow, so that I have some time left over now to deal with individual people who have appointments. And tomorrow I will look at adding a login system to this and fleshing out the HTML a bit and finding online templates you can use for free, and showing you how you can sort of modify these templates, integrate these templates with code you've already written, and how that might be a way of accelerating your development process. I don't think that would be inappropriate, really, for your project. So we sort of expand all this out into all the various ways you need to for your blog system, and then that gives you pretty much a complete set of all the major steps you need for your blog. And then on Wednesday and Thursday, for the two groups respectively, I'll make sure you've got at least this point working 100%, and then we'll try evolving this in the direction of functions, classes, and everything else, and try and think about how we can add features to it and so on. So I'll see you then. Let me just see if there's any remaining questions. Right, good. So let's end the session then.